brothers and sisters, y'all have been lied to. Now, they've had their great players. They've had their Joe Montanas, their Emmitt Smiths, their Dan Marinos, and even their Bruce Smiths. But what they don't tell you is that the first great player was a kicker. Now, to be clear, we do not know his name. We have no record. We have no clue who he is or how to spell his name or who his next of kin is. We have no clue. See, but they don't tell you that because it doesn't perpetuate their myth. These aren't football players. These are kickers who happen to be kicking in the NFL. So you have to know the difference. We didn't come on them planes with the teams. We didn't even take the bus. We walked here. We didn't land on MetLife Stadium. MetLife Stadium landed on us.
Every year, every season, it seems like I experience the same things. It seems like every fantasy season, it's a ritual that has to take place where people always do the same things to me. And I always come back to the recaps and repeat it. I've been doing these recaps for about 7 years. You can go back and listen to it, whichever fucking installment it was, or how many installments I've had these discussions in. I always seem to come to the point where I want to make a deal with somebody, but it's not just the making the deal with them. It always comes at a point where they announce that they would like to make a deal. And sometimes I think people just say it because they want to say things. They don't really say it because they mean it. They say it because having good performances makes them now feel comfortable with discussing trading because they feel like they have a commodity. They have something of value that they want to sell. I don't look at my team or my players as commodities. I don't look at big performances and say, great, now I can sell them. I don't draft with the intention of grabbing your attention so I get a player from you. If I really want someone that bad, I'm going to go out of my way to get them during the draft. That's just how I am. Not everybody's the same, obviously. But I always come to the point where I approach someone who makes it public that they want to make a trade, and the same thing always happens. I make an offer and they make no counter. Obviously, the deal doesn't go down. They look at the deal and then they just completely ignore it. That happened this week with Ed. It happened just yesterday. As some of you, if you follow the chat, you may remember that Ed storms into the chat because he got a victory this week against Eric, and he feels very great about his team and very great about Tyreek Hill. So he made an announcement and said Tyreek Hill now has value. Ha! I told you. Just because of 1 week. Remember, just because of 1 week, I've spoken to you in the past before about what Ed feels like he deserves as far as fantasy, and he makes it very obvious that what he deserves are peak performances. He doesn't deserve championships. He doesn't deserve victories. He deserves individual performances. This is why Ed hugs on to these woo-woo look at me receivers like a Ocho Cinco or a Odell Beckham Jr. It speaks to the character of the player that Ed covets the most, the sort of personality that he cherishes. I make Ed an offer, and I'm not going to say the players that were involved, but there was no counter offer. Obviously, he wasn't interested. I think that's interested, and it's fine if people aren't interested in my trades. I've gotten trade offers from people in the past that were so terrible that I thought they were just trolling me. I thought I was just being trolled, and there was no interest in making a deal. You just wanted to insult me, so you send me the trade offer. Sometimes it's funny, but other times it's just annoying. So I get not being interested in a deal, but I don't get stating that you are interested in trading and then an offer is made to you and you make no counter offer, I don't understand that. I've never gotten it. I've never understood it. Please spare me all the crap about being busy and I wasn't able to get to it. Making a counter offer takes just 2 seconds. If you load up your lineup, then you can make a counter offer. But I would have reacted very differently towards this if I was the one that made a trade offer to someone who was not interested or never even stated that certain players were on the market. Is that what it is? Is that what it is? Is it because I asked for a player that wasn't on the market? If so, if that is the case, what I would suggest to anyone, because this isn't really about Ed, this is something that you guys in general just do, I would suggest that if you make it a point to say, I am here to trade, you should detail the players who are available and the players who aren't available. I think that would be very helpful. I think that would actually help us make a fucking trade. But who gives a shit about Ed and his failed season? This is your week 2 recap. Bundy here, you there. What happened this week? Let's get to those week 1 scores. We had Team Bundy defeating Joelicus Maximus 81-75. 29 points from Josh Allen, 13 points from David Montgomery, who surprised me and who solidified himself as a solid RB2 in my opinion. He was just so determined to get those yards. I don't think I've ever seen a primetime game. Well, obviously, I owned David Montgomery, I think maybe 2 years ago, but I kept him on my bench. This obviously being just week 2, so I got to see him prime time on Sunday Night Football, and I was very, very impressed. 10 points by Justin Tucker, even though I was mocked, and kickers as a whole were mocked. I want to say something, and I know I'm very energetic, I'm very excited. I'm sorry, I'm enthusiastic about this, but I don't appreciate the reaction, and hats off to the commish who made the change. 6 points for 60-yard kicks. Obviously, it was already standard in ESPN scoring. But I don't appreciate the slander that kickers have been getting since I've said the things that I have said. There's a growing epidemic in this league, and it's an epidemic that I would like to title as kickists. What is a kickist? A kickist is Jay. That's what a kickist is. A kickist is someone who looks at a kicker as lesser than, as a surface nuisance, as a worthless player taking up a slot on a fantasy squad. Just think about Jay's reaction about a week ago to my proposal of changing the scores. It was sort of this dismissive tolerance of, well, fine, give them the points. You know, you act like everyone's kicking 60-yard kicks. You know, Jay's reacting as if we're in week 13 of the fantasy season. First of all, it's not about that. It's not about whether kickers will continue to do this. It's just about having those points readily available for what seems to be a, let's not say a common, but let's say a possible occurrence within fantasy games, whether it be this year or next year. And the mere fact that it could stab me in the fucking head doesn't matter. It has nothing to do with any of this. But Jay's attitude over it is kind of like, it's kind of like Joe Balls, right? You guys remember Joe Balls, 157. Joe Balls was perhaps the very first homophobe that I think I ever knew in my whole entire life. The mere thought of homosexuality to Joe was just, it was perplexing. He was like, my nigga, you mean to tell me that there's women and the niggas having sex with niggas? Get the fuck out of here, my nigga. Joe would always say that. Get the fuck out of here, my nigga. Almost to the point that as a young 15 to 16-year-old young man, I kind of thought, he's kind of passionate about this. Is he fighting some internal feelings? Is he having some battle within, some confusing emotions that he doesn't quite grasp yet? Of course, Joe is living somewhere in New York. He's alive and well. I'm sure he's fine. That's not the point. But the point is the dismissive tolerance that J. Ray has is sort of the same. It's kind of like, well, just as long as it's not around me. Just as, build more jails, but not here. Don't build them here. Not in my neighborhood. Kixist. Another Kixist, and these people have outed themselves, is also Joe. And the commish to some extent. Even though the commish changed the scoring, it's the fact that the commish doesn't deem kickers to be a worthy discussion. And they sort of just, they subvert what a kicker is with their humor. The Gonzalez brothers do with their sarcasm. You can just see it's just, their tone is just riddled with it. Joe this week, of course, got, Joe this week, of course, didn't insert Alvin Kamara, who to Joe, he just didn't have the time to insert Alvin Kamara. This is what Joe does. It's always the same every season. I didn't do it because of this. My dog ate my homework, all this kind of shit. It's probably the reason why I won this week. But his kicker got 4 points and Justin Tucker got 10. The same margin of victory for Team Bundy. Kixists. Another kickist, sorry, it's a working term, please, give me a break, is Eric, who on his Champs Only podcast, I'm using air quotes, Champs Only, a podcast which, by the way, is very ironic, because two people who consider themselves individuals, champions, have to fuse together to find power, to find strength. They have to come together. No, they couldn't speak as individuals. They have to fuse together like two fags. On the Champs Only podcast, Eric suggested that we can change the points from 5 to 6 points, but that we should penalize kickers who miss those 60-yard field goals more. There should be more negative points added. As if Josh Allen gets penalized more for a 60-yard interception than a 10-yard interception. This is really what's at the root of a real kickist. A kickist, I'm sorry. This is what's really at the root of a kickist. It's the indifference that Eric speaks with. He just doesn't care. It's almost like Get Out. Some of you guys have seen Get Out. It's a masterpiece. It's a great film. Get Out shows you that there's levels to this racism thing, almost to the point where it doesn't feel racist. It's indifferent. It's, I don't care for you. You're like fertilizer. I need you to grow. You're a life source. That's the tone that Eric speaks with, because kickers have no autonomy whatsoever over the distances that they kick. John Harbaugh says, Justin Tucker, get in there. There's no Jay Serrano wants to bat. He does not make the decision. He just goes in there and he has to bear the burden of whatever distance he must kick. And to now suggest that they should be penalized for missing a 60-yard kick is ridiculous. And Andy, another suspected kickist, agreed. These are the people in this league that we have to deal with, that Team Bundy has to deal with. A supporter of all things kickers. Sorry I took that detour. The next game in the Week 1 scores is Spider-Man losing to Rollo Tomassi 100-91. An amazing performance from Stephon Diggs, 32 points. Joe Burrow with just 15. On the other side, you had Orlando with 19 points from Christian Kirk. I told you guys on the draft recap, I was very interested to see what would happen with Christian Kirk. Even though the Jacksonville offense is not a great one, it seems like he's producing for Jacksonville. 12 points for Michael Thomas. That's pretty strange. Michael Thomas should have been hurt right about now. Highlander Part 2 losing to Charles Lee J. Ray 132 to 124. Charles Lee J. Ray walking away with I suggested it was the John Madden Award for Fantasy Excellence, or maybe that's just the MVP award, but we'll continue to call it the Kirk Cameron Award because it seems like the rest of the league is still considering it the Kirk Cameron Award for Fantasy Excellence with 132 points, 29 points from that wide receiver from Detroit with the Austin St. Brown, whatever the fuck his name is, 28 points from Aaron Jones, and 23 from Herbert. I love the fact that Andy scores 41 points from Lamar Jackson and 28 points from Chubb, and he still loses. Plathanos getting the victory over La Bamba, 74-67. Pedro is without a doubt so far the worst team in the league, not getting the sort of production that he would have hoped for from Christian McCaffrey, who in week one got 11 points, 33 rushing yards. At least this week, he got 102 yards with 12 points, but he hasn't put in a home run performance. Aaron Rodgers either, with 3 points in week one and just 16 points this week. And Pedro, showing a form of kixicism himself, does not insert a kicker. Obviously, you had Harrison Butker, who was injured before the Thursday night game, and Pedro takes him out and then does absolutely nothing afterwards. I would have just dropped him and just inserted a kicker, because who would have picked up Harrison Butker? If you like him enough to the point that you bench him, because I would bench Justin Tucker in that situation. If he's injured, I don't think anybody would have picked him up, so I probably would have dropped him. People talk a lot of shit about Justin Tucker, but I don't honestly believe that anyone in this league would have jumped onto the waiver wire to pick him up. I would just have dropped him and picked up another kicker, but obviously Pedro thought it was more important to just do nothing. Maybe he should have dropped Valdez Scantling if he cared about Butker that much, because believe it or not, keeping these kickers with, these kickers who are a part of great offenses is valuable. So maybe that was Pedro's frame of thinking, but he lost, and I think that was pretty much the reason why he lost, because it wasn't a large margin. Pedro walks away with his second consecutive Tito Award. And on the other side, you had Hensel, who basically got 26 points from the Buccaneers defense. If you score over 20 points in this league from your defense, you ain't losing to anybody unless you're Joe facing Team Bundy. And finally, to round up the week one scores, we had Ewok Rape losing to Harlem Heat 113-97. Ed getting 31 points from Tyreek Hill. This is why he was so happy and so enthusiastic and so ready to not trade. 25 points from Kyler Murray, and look at this, 12 points from Breece Hall. Look at that. All right, Ed. 32 points for Jalen Hurts, who at this point in the season, just 2 weeks, he's showing some benefit for Eric. Najee Harris, and what I'm assuming is just the Steelers offense just in general not performing. 16 points from Mark Andrews and 13 points from his kicker, Daniel Carlston. A surprise victory for Ed, because let's face it, we pick on Ed and we pick on Joe because they go against the conventional moves that traditionally win in this league. I ignore what happens in all fantasy leagues. I'm not the ADP guy. I'm not the guy who's knowledgeable about what this guy does against these kind of offenses or whatever the fuck. I just know that in this league, you're not going to win many games if you don't at least have a second tier running back. If you don't have a second tier running back, you're not going to win many games. And normally what is required are performances like Tyreek Hill just put in. Is that something that Ed realizes, or is he just living for right now? We're not sure. Let's move on to the standings. At top of the Techno Viking division, you have Rollo Tomassi at 2-0. Team Bundy. In the number 2 slot at 1-0-1, technically, I am still undefeated. You know, maybe if you want to consider that I've got a 0.5 loss, if I've got half a loss, that's fine. But I have nothing in my loss column. Plathanos with a record of 1-1-1. Joelicus Maximus with 0-1-1, and La Bamba at the bottom of the Techno Viking division with 0-1-1. Over to the Afro Ninja division, we have Charles Lee Chargers at 2-0. Spider-Man, who lost that game solely because of the doing of Josh Allen, which makes me very, very happy, with a record of 1-1. Harlem Heat with a record of 1-1. Highlander at 0-1-1, and Ewok Rape at 0-2-0. The highest scores in the league are as follows. We have a tie at top with 224 apiece for Charles Lee Chargers and Spider-Man. Ewok Rape with 214, 209 for Rollo Tomassi, and let's just mention Andy, who's over 200 points himself with 204. These are the matchups for week 3, with one interesting matchup taking place that we'll get to in a second. Plathanos going up against Team Bundy. I like my chances against Hensel. Well, ESPN likes my chances against Hensel, apparently, because if you look at the matchups, the only advantage that Hensel has is in the tight end position, and that's Kyle Pitts over Dawson Knox. And the reason why I like that is why I like it for several reasons, because Kyle Pitts hasn't really done anything. He's at this point, he's just running off of last year's clout. At 19 points, he had 2 performances. His last 2 performances were exactly the same. 2 catches for 19 yards, 1 point so far for the 2022 season. And Dawson Knox, who is clearly just there because of upside. That's the only reason why I have him in there, because there is a possibility that he could grab a red zone touchdown. Now, don't get me wrong. If I happen to lose several games, I would take him out and start to stream the tight end position. I'm not locked in with Dawson Knox if he doesn't get any production, but I like a chance to get a second victory here versus Plathanos. The very next game here is Charles Lee Chargers up against Joelicus Maximus. Joelicus Maximus projected to get 81 points and Charles Lee J. Ray at 86. Will Charles Lee J. Ray continue his undefeated season? That seems to be the likely scenario, especially if Joe leaves in a open slot. La Bamba, who is statistically the worst team, and Pedro is the worst team in the league. I know that Eric doesn't have any victories either, but Pedro is scoring the lowest amount of points, and he's not getting any production out of the people that he's supposed to be getting production from, along with the fact that Pedro just did what Pedro always does. And, you know, to be fair with Pedro, I mean, last season, J. Ray started the first 5 weeks of the season 0-5, if I'm not mistaken. But he still made the playoffs. Though, there is a big difference from a historical standpoint. It's no longer a joke, right? It's no longer a joke. As I've said, I've been doing these for about 7 years, and maybe it's looked at as maybe sort of like it's a made up attribute when you say that one owner is better than the other. It's not made up when we consider that Jason is a better owner than Pedro, because maybe Jason cares about this particular league more than he does his other 5 to 7 leagues, and Pedro probably has 20 other leagues. So Jason starts off 0-5, and Pedro, if he starts off with, you know, his first 4 games, you know, getting losses, you can pretty much just write Pedro in for the lottery draft, especially now up against Rollo Tomassi. And it's very likely that Pedro isn't going to get a victory. Harlem Heat versus Spider-Man, 90-91, with the advantage going to Harlem Heat. this matchup can go in either direction. Of course, it's very interesting because Orlando just picked up Tua via Tolola, the area, the Areola. Let's call him that, Tua Areola, just because I'm a titty man. Orlando just finished picking him up. In my opinion, he should just throw him in there because Russell Wilson has already shown himself that he's about to be just a third tier, maybe high end, let's say low end second tier quarterback for this season. Maybe he just doesn't have the tools. The offense just isn't the right offense. Plus, they're going up against the San Francisco 49ers, who have a very solid defense. In my opinion, Orlando should throw him in there just because of the mere fact that just because of the mere fact that Miami is going up against Buffalo. They're going to have to throw. They don't have a running game to speak of anyway, so they're gonna throw a bunch of passes, and the likelihood that he's going to connect with Tyreek Hill is very likely. So even if Ed kills you with 40 points, you have to figure that Areola is going to get about 28 points to go along with that. Is Russell Wilson going to get 25, 28 points this week? What's the necessity behind him this week going up against the 49ers, who just lost their starting quarterback and now have Jimmy G? That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. We have Ewok Rape also going up against Highlander, and this is really adorable, isn't it? Because you have a podcast called Champs Only, and it's week 3, and neither of these gentlemen have a victory. What I would like to hear is an honest discussion of why one will lose and the other will win. I don't want to hear a vague conversation about I'm the champ, I've got the chip, I've got the belt. No. I want to hear Andy state why he is going to win this week and Eric to retort his points. Now, I will make a prediction because it's interesting. It's interesting because they get to discuss it, like it's going to be interesting when Orlando and Jason face each other because they are going to discuss it as well. So what I will say is that I am going to give Andy the edge, but I think this is going to be a close game. I'm giving Andy the edge because of the Lamar Jackson and the Mark Andrews connection. It is very, I don't think any of us can say that the advantage goes to the man who has the quarterback in that scenario. Like if I face Paul, obviously Paul has Diggs and I have Josh Allen. I wouldn't necessarily say that the advantage goes to the guy with the quarterback. If they connect that week, it's very likely that the quarterback also spread the ball to other players. This was kind of the point that I had. Oh, by the way, let me make this point as well. Joe, I'm not just going to beat you. But I'm going to leave you with some advice. In my opinion, a better pick at this point of the season, I mean, if you want to go with the hot thing and go with Areola, so far this season, the number 4 ranked quarterback in fantasy with 313 points in week 1, 337 in week 2, 7 touchdowns in total, tying with Josh Allen at the moment, is Carson Wentz. 27 points week 1 and 27 points in week 2. So let me make that suggestion to Mr. Joe, right? To Mr. Joe, who thinks that for some reason it's a good idea to stack up Cooper Kupp with this fucking asshole who looks like he drinks beer too much. But let me get back to my point. I don't necessarily think that the advantage goes to the guy with the quarterback, but if Mark Andrews and Lamar Jackson connect this Sunday, then the advantage goes to Andy because it's very likely that Lamar Jackson also got off some running. He also hit off Bateman. He's getting his points, and maybe Mark Andrews walks away with a 17 and Lamar Jackson walks away with a 30. I think the advantage goes to Andy because at the moment he has the better running back. Eric has nothing so far from Najee Harris. AJ Dillon he's a change of pace back. He's not the number 1 guy, especially after the week that Aaron Jones just had. I do like the fact that they're going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who at this moment have so many injuries, and Mike Evans. And by the way, I think it's hilarious that Mike Evans has this vendetta against this Lattimore guy. I'm pretty sure you guys watch ESPN, so you saw the history. You saw almost an identical attack that Mike Evans had on Lattimore 5 years ago, where he just comes out of nowhere and he pushes the fuck out of Lattimore. Did Lattimore fuck his woman or something? Does Lattimore owe Mike Evans some money? Maybe Paul can let us know. He's like an aficionado on all things Mike Evans. He knows his credit score, his blood type, his dick size, everything. AJ Dillon, you know, I like his chances because of the fact that I don't think Tampa Bay is going to score a lot of points. So, you know, maybe the Packers will be in control and they'll be running the ball a lot. But as I said, the advantage goes to Andy in this situation. I think Eric will start off week 4 with no victory. And that's it. Also, I do want to mention this, you know, sort of just a comment just out of nowhere, because I know a lot of you guys are movie buffs, but I was only aware of this just like 2 days ago, and I didn't know that Clerks 3 just came out yesterday. Clerks 3. Now, I'll admit the trailer looks sus as fuck. You know, it's basically Kevin Smith massaging his own creation, but I was a fan of the first. I enjoyed Clerks 2. I actually went to the movie theaters to watch Clerks 2. So I'm in for Clerks 3. So just in case any of you guys are fucking, you know, weirdos like me, I think Eric, I think Eric had the Clerks DVD. I don't even remember, but I'm a Kevin Smith fan, so I'm excited for that. I just wanted to mention that before I told you guys to fuck yourselves. You know, that's all I wanted to say. And I also wanted to say, do not make any announcements about trading if you're not going to make a counter. I'm not telling you that if we don't make a trade, you're a fuckboy. I'm telling you you're a fuckboy because you didn't even throw me a counter. You didn't say anything. It's like what I say about you guys all the time. You're not counter punchers. You guys talk a lot of shit, but then when you get punched in the mouth, you have nothing to say. Why is that? Huh? So as always, may your quarterbacks get hurt before they leave the locker room. May your running backs pull their hamstrings, and may your wide receivers get arrested for marijuana possession. Go fuck yourselves, kickists.